I will call the Mecklenburg County Environmental Stewardship Committee meeting to order on April 9th. Good afternoon and welcome to the April 9th meeting of the Mecklenburg County Environmental Stewardship Committee. I am Commissioner Elaine Powell and I serve as the chair. We are all committed to the important work of maintaining, protecting, preserving, and enhancing our environment so that all residents can thrive. A virtual attendance option is offered as an alternate mode of accessibility to our meeting today. We welcome the public who have been provided a call-in number to access this meeting. Those attending virtually are asked to display your full name on Zoom, as attendance will be recorded for the minutes. Additionally, virtual attendees are asked to remain muted and use the chat box to submit any comments or questions that you have so that we can read them aloud during the meeting. The agenda, meeting minutes, and presentations for today were sent out to those who are on our distribution list. If you did not receive these and you would like a copy, please make your request via email to Erin Stanforth. Her email is Erin, E-R-I-N, .Stanforth, S-T-A-N-F-O-R-T-H, @mecnc.gov. We will begin today's meeting by having each board member identify him or herself so that the record will reflect who is present and participating in our meeting. I am Mecklenburg County Commissioner Elaine Powell. I represent District 1, which is all of North Mecklenburg, Huntersville, Davidson, Cornelius, North Charlotte, ETJ, part of Lake Norman, and most of Mountain Island Lake. Commissioner Jarrell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Mark Jarrell, District 4, also serving as Vice Chair.
Commissioner Rodriguez McDowell.
Good afternoon. I'm Susan Rodriguez McDowell, elected by the people of District 6.
Commissioner Altman.
Good afternoon. My name is Lee Altman, County Commissioner serving at large.
For the record, all commissioners have acknowledged their presence for the meeting, therefore we have a quorum. I will now ask Erin Stanforth to assist with staff introductions and introductions on the virtual attendance before we go to audience members here. Thank you, Erin.
Thank you, Commissioner Powell. With us online, we have Chris Matthews, Krista Rogers, Doug Shoemaker, Ebenezer Jarlaputi, Ed Tavares, Jeff Smithberger, Pam Escobar, Reverend Garner Mullins, Richard Matulis, Shauna Caldwell, Lee Jones, and Zach Turner.
Thank you. And then staff.
Sure. I'm Erin Stanforth, Sustainability Resiliency Manager.
Kathleen Reed, Sustainability Consultant.
Clint Brooks, Sustainability Consultant.
Dr. Johnson.
Sean Bloom, Catawba Lands Conservancy.
Welcome.
Good afternoon. Leslie Johnson, Deputy County Manager.
And good afternoon. My name is Gordon Miller and I'm one of the constituents.
Welcome.
Bert Lynn, Capital Planning for Mecklenburg County Park and Recreation.
Hi, I'm Susan Hall. I'm an Assistant County Attorney.
Jacqueline McNeil, County Asset and Facility Management.
Roberta Whitner, County Asset and Facilities Management.
Welcome. Okay, moving forward, is there a motion to approve the minutes from March 12th Environmental Stewardship Committee?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Rodriguez McDowell, seconded by Commissioner Jarrell. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And the minutes are approved. As everyone can see, the agenda item for today is land conservation and preservation discussion. And before we begin, I just have some comments. So I think it's really important before we move forward in the meeting to have a mindfulness of the environmental stewardship, the environmental leadership action plan. And so I pulled up the environmental policy last night and I thought I'm going to highlight the things that are the most important. I don't know if you can see. So
there's a lot of highlights is what you're.
So I pretty much highlighted 90% of it. And I was really proud of the work that we did together to make this happen. And we adopted this March 16th, 2021, the full board, unanimous. And, you know, I made a copy at 1:30 in the morning. You can see the timestamp so that you would have a mindfulness of our policy. And as time has gone by, we're starting to see the threats to this policy. I don't know if we anticipated. You can't do it, and nothing's perfect. And I think it felt perfect, but it's not perfect. And so there are threats to the land that we have purchased with environmental leadership dollars. There are threats to all of our parkland, but it's very concerning to hear some of the comments that I've heard in public about what people think they're going to do with what they're calling land banking. And it's not land banking. This is intentionally bought to protect natural resources. And so while we're listening and talking and discussing, I just want you to have the mindfulness of all of these different things. And I was going to read it, but it'll take up a lot of time, but I reserve the right to read it throughout the meeting. But at the end, on the second page, be it further resolved. It's really important, be it further resolved that an affiliated environmental leadership action plan guide the activities of county government such that the county may take result-oriented steps and align operations in support of current and future pollution reduction, resource conservation, climate preparedness initiatives. It includes looking for opportunities to lead and innovate. It includes acquiring land for recreation, ecosystem preservation, recycling, stormwater management, and protecting the quality of our life. It includes managing, maintaining, and conserving county properties to create resilient ecosystems, including grasslands, forests, wetlands, and aquatic environments. It includes embracing justice through equal protection and enforcement of environmental laws and regulations to include the county's racial equity toolkit when implementing the action plan, and more broadly during environmental decision-making. There's so many important things in here, but it doesn't include the layers of protection that we need on these lands, because the forces of development are more powerful than all the nonprofits that could show up to advocate for protecting our natural resources. So I just want you to have that mindfulness while we're going through. And now I will kick it over to Aaron Stanforth.
Thank you, Commissioner Powell. As Commissioner Powell mentioned, the sole item on today's agenda is our conservation and preservation efforts. This is the third time we've brought this particular item to this group. We're going to do things a little differently. We're hoping to have a really open discussion from y'all after about 5 to 10 slides. Just to recap what we've chatted about in the past, we're going to go over briefly the current land preservation and conservation tools that we use within the county. Briefly go over our land inventory assessment and then get into that discussion piece. Beautiful photos taken by county staff at our nature preserves. So currently, tools that we have in place include conservation easements, conservation/preservation agreements. That's with the city of Charlotte. We only have 2 of those in the county. They're quite dated. Deed restrictions, ecological conservation areas, FEMA buyouts, historic designations, land and water conservation funds, North Carolina Land and Water Fund, tree save, and swim buffers. And so in addition to that, we also have the following procedures currently in place. There's a BOCC policy directive for nature preserve conservation. And some of the partnerships that we have require protection. Those include the Land and Water Conservation Fund, the Land and Water Fund, Tree Save, and FEMA buyouts. We also have deed restrictions on parks that we've acquired during the city-county merger that happened a couple decades ago. We also have a 50-50 guideline for park development, meaning 50% of each park parcel that we acquire can be developed, the other 50 has to remain untouched. And then when we get into nature preserves, we have the 10-90 guideline, meaning 10% of those nature preserves can be developed and 90% must remain untouched to ground us. And so we wanted to go over briefly just a land inventory assessment, meaning, so these are all the labeled use within GIS of all the different types of parcels that's within our current Parks and Recreation portfolio, you'll see that a lot of these aren't necessarily conservation focused, but many of them are. So I'm not going to go through each one. You can look at those in totality. We did use Polaris to capture this data. Without the Park and Recreation building acreage, which you'll see from our aquatic center, some event venues, et cetera. The total land acreage is 22,312 acres of natural open space, just again, to ground us all. And so we did want to just highlight a few of the tools that are under our current land use restrictions. The first being deed restrictions. At least 2,700, sorry, acres of parks have a deed restriction in place from that city-county merger that we did a few years back. We do have over 340 acres of land that has a conservation easement on it through either a land trust or through the county. And then we also have over 3,000 acres that have conservation easements on them via the state of North Carolina. Right now, we also have 3 additional parcels that are being, we're pursuing state dedication for those 3 parcels. And once finalized, that'll add an additional 220 acres to that 3,000 total, which is great. We have 289 acres that have a conservation/preservation agreement on them with the city of Charlotte, and at least 414 acres of parkland have a historic designation. And so in total, I'll move this so we can see a little bit better. In total, at least 6,800 acres have restrictions in place of our current portfolio. And also, I just want to note, there are some restrictions that aren't included in this list, and that because just they're difficult to quantify, that includes swim buffers. So what's along the banks of our creeks within county property. And so before we get into this, in your packet, after the presentation, you have a term sheet. It looks like this, it's double-sided. And for those that are online, Kathleen's going to drop this link into the chat so everybody can see it together. Essentially what this is a listing of all the different terms we're about to see on this graph. And then within those definitions, we also have if they have low flexibility in terms of protection or high flexibility in terms of protection, and then intensity of protection, and then examples of each of those terms. Does that track for everybody? Okay, great. It's Kathleen. See that and close it. Thank you. So what this is we tried to map out all the different tools that we're using right now in terms of rate of flexibility, meaning how easy is it to change use or change size or what have you. And then, so that's the axis that's on the left-hand side, where it says flexibility. And then on the bottom, that's a level of protection. And so the further out you get, the more intense the level of protection is for that particular tool. The 2 green dots you see down here below, right here, that is the 90-10 rate for our nature preserves and our 50-50 rate for park development, meaning we're only able to develop 10% of each nature preserve and 50% of each park, and the rest remains untouched. And so just to kind of level what exactly each of the little circles means, up here, this is our ecological conservation easement. Nope. Ecological conservation assessment, excuse me. This is an internal tool that we use when we are looking at new properties that are specific for park use. As we get further out, you see that historic designations, while flexibility is not very high, there's also not a lot of protection associated with that particular tool. Once we get kind of in the middle here, we have deed restrictions and FEMA buyout. There's not a lot of flexibility with either of these, and the protection is relatively centered in the middle. The further out we get, we have these conservation preservation agreement, which is that tool that I mentioned. We haven't really been in use for the last 20 or so years. We do have 2 of them in our portfolio. Swim buffers, also high protection, not a lot of flexibility there. Same with land and water conservation fund. And then the most protected, I'll say, tools that we have are tree save, conservation easements, and land and water fund. And so again, these are all the different tools that we're using currently within the park system for protection of our assets. But we wanted to put everything just in one big place so we could all kind of compare and contrast. That makes sense? Okay, great. So that was a very quick presentation because what we wanted to do was, frankly, as I said at the beginning of this is the third time we've come to this group with this particular topic. And we, in our opinion, need input. We want to hear from y'all specifically as to where you want to see this go, how we can make the best possible recommendations possible, right? And so with that, we wanted to kind of open it up to some questions. If we could, we'd like to hear from each commissioner if you'd like, as it relates to these 4 overarching questions. And so all of this is specific to land preservation and conservation. We've got, what are your concerns, aspirations? What are you unclear about? And where's your tolerance? Does your tolerance differ based on which tool we're using and which, I guess, park use category, meaning parkland versus nature preserve? And please utilize your term sheets as you can, because we're hoping that this can kind of guide the conversation.
So is there anyone that wants to start with concern?
Mhm.
I have a question first before, is there a map that, you know, like a visual to show like the different, like all these little circles that are different colors? Do we have a map with those?
No,
Okay.
but I think there might be a way to do that in Polaris, potentially. We could get it for you after the meeting. Oh, GIS could make it. Gotcha.
But not what?
Not in Polaris. Polaris is
Oh.
an outward product for other attention. This is the software tool behind it is GIS, and then maybe what they partner with our GIS team to see if we can do something that helps us with stuff. It requires us to have to be able to say which parcels have which. Whatever. And we can do that when GIS can happen.
Okay, but actually, when I think about it, when I look at your list, in total, it's only 6,800 acres. So there wouldn't be very much color on the map if we were trying to, so that's kind of a bad thing, actually. I mean, when you look at the percentage of, you know, land, it wouldn't be a whole lot on the map.
Right, and so like even to that point, like you have to think about it, and I don't know how it shows up. 4,000 of the 22,000 is greenways, right? So the greenways, are we gonna, the greenways, I'll just say that, the walkways and greenways. Then you have another substantial share of it that are golf courses. So when you start peeling back, they may not have the tools on it. But even like with the green, well, so that's why we also share the categorization, so you can kind of understand what is the acreage in each of those components, because you may have where you individually stand with regards to the last question or the last set of tolerance and flexibility. And that's kind of really the root of kind of understanding this. Other questions are very important, but the tolerance and flexibility, you may say, illustratively, I want little flexibility and I want high tolerance. And that says, okay, then that means these are the types of tools that we typically use. And do you have that same viewpoint illustratively for every single type of part, amenity categorization that we have? Thank you, it wasn't, yeah. So it's trying to understand those types of elements. But to your original question, can we map it? There are elements that we could map. Yes, you're right. It would be about 2,000 that we would show that are currently with the tools to the best of our ability. But there's some that may not be as easy to farm out.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, can I ask a
Commissioner Altman.
So, what, unless I'm missing something, which is totally possible, what would be helpful to me is to have, you know, we have a lot of small parcels and medium-sized parcels and large parcels. And each time we do one of these things, it's probably very labor intensive because there's going to be legal and stuff.
and analysis, and it's, you know, each time it's gonna be a lift. So I would be interested in having staff create a list that lists all the parcels in terms of biggest bang for our buck. Like, here's a large chunk that is completely unprotected. And for this chunk, you know, because given the different, you know, sensitivities and considerations, y'all make a recommendation consistent with what our goals are to protect what we have put aside. You know, make a recommendation for which mechanism you think is best. And let us have a conversation from that point, because there are many, many parcels. So I think we first need to zero in on the largest ones so we can do the most good as quickly as possible. Unless there's some other sensitivity, like it's a really important habitat and it's the only one in the county and we need to get to that one first, even though it's little, you know. And then y'all make a recommendation about what you think is appropriate. And then we can have a conversation to challenge, like, is this as conservative as it could be, you know, or could it go be even more conservative, you know? And then I would have a better point of departure to move forward with actions. That makes sense.
So let's just go through the first question first. Like, what are the concerns about having unprotected land?
Do you want us to state the obvious?
Did you have anything, Commissioner Jarrell,
Um,
yet?
not yet.
Okay.
No, I think for me, what would be helpful, Madam Chair, if you tee up what you would like to see, like where you want to lead us to. And if you want to set the table there, it would be easier. I mean, I guess I'm trying and Commissioner Altman didn't really say this, but for me, I would like a level of prioritization. Like, I don't know what our most vulnerable places are. And once I'm able to understand, like, what's most vulnerable, how many acres, and then it would be easier for me maybe to back into the tool to use. But overall, I think, I was trying to talk to her, Mike. Sorry, thank you. But so a prioritization would be helpful for me, I think. And then two, but Madam Chair, just understanding what you would like to see, what we're trying to drive to, where you're leading us would be helpful.
Would this be a good time to make a motion so that we could talk about it, or no?
I think like it's just good for the concerns right now.
Okay.
And it's really important for me to hear, like the parts that you'd like to see more of, because it's so easy Bert is an expert on, like, you say what you want to see and he can pull it right up on screen like this big and you can see it. And so, you know, when Commissioner Altman was asking that, it takes a while for him to punch it in, but he can pop it up. And the whole natural resources team can too. And then level of prioritization. It's interesting to hear different perspectives because no matter what we do, like if I won the $1 billion lottery and bought all the parcels I could with the $1 billion lottery, it still won't be enough. And I spent every penny on the lands that we need to protect natural resources. It wouldn't be enough to balance the needs of the population. It's so out of balance. And so when we look at 22,000 acres, that sounds huge. How many acres are in the county?
500? Is it
Do you know how many acres are in the county?
500 square acres?
I know it's 550 some odd square miles. I do believe that the 22,000 number is roughly 6 to 7% of the land area within the county.
And so I tried to send everyone the picture this morning of out of balance, like what out of balance is. And so for so long, developers have had the power to develop without consideration to the environment. And now we're trying to catch up. And so it's important to have a level of prioritization, which all natural resources staff does, but it's all important. And that's the hard part for me, it's all top priority. Every parcel we buy, because we have a prioritization process to go through to buy it, especially since ELAP. And so it's all top priority. Some are higher than others in stormwater management or tree canopy or biodiversity protection. And so each one is different, but they're all so important. And so my concern is that while people are calling this land banking, which we are not land banking, they have ideas, and I've heard it out loud. So somebody says, we're getting
So there's three actually.
3 different answers.
Three different states. Dr. Shoemaker asked us if please illustrate a worst case scenario. Lee Jones, Director of Park and Rec, considered that we have 336,000 acres. Heard about that. And then, Mr. Rogers says natural resources, across all these categories, including properties in the process of third-party protection. These are only the best of the best. We can't provide the data in GIS web app.
This is awesome. I love having like all these people comment. Okay, so worst case scenario from Dr. Shoemaker is that there's so many, the wrong people are elected that don't have an environmental lens, that make decisions that impact the environment because they're swayed by disproportionate sway of developers, or even neighborhoods that are putting pressure on, like, there's no more green space. We want to develop this nature preserve, or we need a parking lot. And so the other night on PBS, the national parks were on there, and there was a national park designed to protect the natural resources in Hawaii. And there was so much pressure from the population around it that they have ruined the park because they wanted, so many people came, they wanted increased parking, all kinds of things happened to where now the park staff has to do restoration to make it better. But there has been permanent damage to biodiversity. And so there are a lot of worst case scenarios. And how do you protect the land? Because I do understand when people talk about the future, because you don't know what the future is going to hold. You just don't know. But how do we make our environmental policies stronger to where we have layers of protection where it is protected, and if somebody wants it unprotected, they have to go through layers to say why. And then people have to be there to say, all right, you check this box. It's like, my background is healthcare, and we didn't used to ask everyone, like, before surgery, do you know where your surgery is going to be? What is your birthday? All of that. But you learn through what you see went wrong, that you have to make things better. And this policy has to be stronger, because worst case scenario is that these lands that we bought to protect natural resources are used for something else, where the protection of natural resources is not a priority anymore. And the public suffers. And the first way I see the suffering, there are many ways of suffering, economic suffering, but the way I see it is it's out of balance, and it impacts the health and wellness of the people that live in the community. And so I hope that answers your question, Dr. Shoemaker, but I can think of, if we're not protecting it, we're not doing our job. And that is my concern. Is there anything that you guys would like to add? Okay, aspirations. What are your aspirations?
If it would help, we also have some scenarios that we've outlined just as examples of things that we've seen in the past. Maybe that could help spark a little concern, aspiration discussion.
Well, before we start, I will just say Like, I have been in so many meetings with my colleagues, our aspirations, I can tell you, like, I can say this, knowing they won't argue. We want to make a positive difference for the future. So if you want to give us a scenario.
Absolutely. So the first scenario that we have is, we've got a nature preserve that is not designated nor is it protected. There's residential housing located on both sides, and residents have asked for active space as well as a walking path within that preserve. What should we do with that particular scenario? Utilizing the tools that we have listed here in the term sheet.
Put a conservation easement on it. And you can put a conservation easement on it. You have to really, to protect it. And then there are things that you can do within a conservation easement to make it accessible to the public. Because we want all of these lands to be accessible to the public, but not do harm. And so how do you do that in a healthy way? But you have to have a conservation easement, or they're going to be on top of it soon, building on top of a creek. Because there's no land left. That's my point of view.
If you don't mind, I'm gonna add something to this for your thought process in this particular scenario. You can approach this scenario and sharing your thoughts with the group at large from multiple perspectives. You can do the concern, the aspiration, and a host of those things that are there, but unclear in the tolerance and flexibility. In that scenario, the question, I'm going to try to do it on the spectrum. You could have, before this became a residential interest, you could have had a conservation easement on it that said it had to be a nature preserve. So that's one. So you could have said, yes, I'm supportive of it just having conservation. When it's a nature preserve, I want conservation easements on it, right? 3 years, 4 years later, someone then says, oh, I want a trail. Well, if the conservation easement didn't allow for a trail, then you can't do the trail. Does that matter to you or not? Would you have wished in hindsight in this scenario that you had given a little bit more flexibility so a trail could go through it illustratively? If you say yes to that perspective, then if you say, yes, I want to do conservation easements on all nature preserves. However, going into it, I want to say the conservation easement could still allow for boom, 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 boom. Or you may approach it as, I want conservation easements only on a section of the entire parcel, not the entire parcel, to ensure that there's the flexibility. So those are the types of things that we're trying to understand, because we have all the tools, right? What plays out is, one, down the road, be it in your tenure or some future tenure, do you want to give any flexibility at all? Or do you want it to always be 100% the way it is? And do you want it to be the whole parcel or part of the parcel? And to whatever, and start us understanding that, because be it you put it in policy, be it put it in whatever, that tolerance point becomes the critical part for us to figure out what language either in policy that needs to be drafted, what tools and how we act upon it. Could our current methods, there's a host of them, right? Could a future board take land that we currently have in present day and have it used for another purpose? The answer, in truth, is yes, right? So to what degree do you want to mitigate that from happening, and under what circumstances is it okay to happen, or is it never, right? And those are the things that we have to understand, because now what we have is when the parcel is approved in the board to the public, it says it's for park purpose. So that's out there in record. You could say, yeah, I may be willing to be flexible, but if I want to be flexible, I needed to go back through a more intense process before it can just automatically happen. Well, then we would come up with recommendations that align to that kind of approach. If you have one with its no flexibility and conservation, in many instances, you may have to go to the state to get it to be approved. And it's those types of things that we need to hear from you so that we can bring those recommendations that align to it. Because what Leslie may recommend may not be completely aligned to what you have an interest in. And so we don't want to recommend something that may, or it could align, but there may be things that don't align. And so I don't want to bring something before you that doesn't speak to the energy of at least the four of you. And it's a hard kind of, but that those truth conversations need to have so we as staff can come back and bring those options to you. If you're saying, yep, we want you to propose something that's everything is complete easements, conservations easements, that's the four. Now we'll share with you some things that you need to be aware of. These are the costs. This is how we want to do it. If you want to say, oh, we are interested in easements, and when we get this huge parcel to 100 acres, can we try to be intentional of the areas that we know that need to be preserved and only put it there? Or do you want them to home? Those are the things that we want to hear from you. I think that's what we're trying to get to the root of it all. And it's those tough questions to get the consensus so that we as staff can then go back and bring you what you're asking for, which are recommendations that align to it, be it changes in policy, changes in our actions and procedures, or whatever. It's a tough conversation.
Commissioner Altman.
Yeah, you go first, I'll go after.
So, I feel like I am trying to do estate planning for my children and I don't know who they are. Like, I don't know what their needs are. One may, like I could set up a binding trust for them all, an irrevocable trust where like they have to go to college because I want them to all to go to college. But what if it turns out one of them is, an artist and that would crush her and she needs to have resources, like it may be that my colleagues have the foresight or knowledge to answer your question, but I do not. But it's not even that it's hard. I don't have the ability to, because I don't know, I would need to go to each location or at least have them in front of me on the screen with their, all their, like I just cannot in a vacuum begin to give you an answer. And like I said, maybe my colleagues can, but if none of us feel comfortable, I go back to where I began, which is I would like to not try to do this for all the parcels initially. I would like to begin with biggest targets, the most glaring, at risk, vulnerable, largest, whatever, and go through this analysis and discussion and try to do it in a sensible manner on a much smaller scale, because I cannot do this responsibly like this.
So, Commissioner Rodriguez McDowell.
Yeah, I see what you're saying about, because I've done that
Yeah.
with the trust, with your kids and, yeah. I think it's a great analogy, but in this case, I feel that we should be leaning towards conservation in a harder way. Like we should be more stringent about it, because the forces that want to tear down conservation are so great that I think we need to put up a real strong force field against them. And, but we know, just from our past conversations, that they can be undone. Like the conservation, if you put a conservation easement, it can be undone later, but you have to go through steps. So it would mean that people couldn't just willy-nilly go through it. They would really have to go through levels.
Yes, the one thing that I want to make sure it's clear in the room, it can be changed, but you, meaning you individually, collectively, the board will not get to make that change. So I'm not saying, I'm not advocating for this or whatever, but you.
Can
with
we
the
give it over to
conservation,
someone else's power?
it
if
would be
we
somebody
don't-
else's power to make that decision.
Okay, which
Yeah.
might be good if the people that are elected in the future are the people that are not seeing the value that we're seeing, and that we believe we're trying to protect.
Did you want to read something?
Yes.
Who has the power? The state, maybe?
Ed Harris, who's sitting in for Dr. Shoemaker, or, excuse me, Dave Cable, stated that conservation easements are flexible in all things that the owner might wish to include, trails, active parks,
Right.
et cetera.
Right, you have to put it in, when you set your, so from a process perspective, when you choose to put the conservation easement on it, on the front end, just like you were saying, you have to plan for flexibility, craft that in the agreement so that it can account for that. Then, if for some reason you want to do something outside of those parameters, whatever those things may be, that decision would be with the entity that you've given that's overseeing your conservation use. So it could be the state, it could be the Catawba Land Conservancy, it could be another entity, depending on how that is structured. That's legally,
Can we not structure it that we retain the
no,
authority?
we can't do it yourselves.
Because it's an easement. Okay.
Yeah, the intent is that, and I don't know, if Susan want to speak to it from a legal perspective, but the intent is to hold you, to make sure that you're accountable for achieving the way that you said that, use the land in its intended purpose. And so it doesn't give you the flexibility yourself to change your mind. It gives it to another entity to ensure that you don't just change it to change it. So, and it's a good protection. It is a good mechanism to ensure that you don't change your mind just on your own willy-nilly, that it's held by somebody else to make those changes that have alignment with what you agreed upon on the front end.
I would be comfortable trying to list those things that we would find acceptable and building it into the conservation easement, such as, a walking trail, as long as it's not paved and not tearing down, like I could see, you could have limited things built in so that someone didn't have to like go and try to, make a huge change for people to be able to walk through it, so I could see maybe we would create a process, Madam Chair, on, what kinds of things would we think would be okay
And the
in
process.
our
yeah,
conservation easements.
Process would have to include natural resources staff. Like it
Mhm.
can't just be, it
Right,
has to be people that are involved
yeah,
and professionals.
it couldn't be us, like just, I don't
Yeah,
know
we all have
enough.
to work together.
Yeah, right.
Commissioner Jarrell?
Yeah, so, I definitely agree with the need for protection. I mean, and to lean heavily in that direction, to your point, without question. Where I'm unclear is with respect to conservation easements, and Dave was a huge help. But it's almost like it's being framed up as this is our only tool. And I don't believe it is our only tool. So for me, where it's applicable, it makes sense to use conservation easements, but that's where I'm trying to drive towards when I say prioritization. Maybe that was the wrong term. But I need to understand, out of the 22,000 acres or whatever the number is, there's a universe of 15,000 acres that where a conservation easement would be something that we should consider. Because on the other 8, that's not the right tool for me to use. Right? So, that's where I'm saying I would like to get a better understanding of the universe, so then I can pick and choose the tools that I want that would give us the best outcome that we're trying to do. Because if I'm saying a conservation easement where a different tool would be better, then, I mean, it's sort of a waste of time. And then the final point would be, I think we would need to build in some level of flexibility, or limited amount of flexibility So because it will be out of a future board's hands in a third-party entity to make a decision about the community that we may not have intended, that we may not necessarily like, just because a third party is making it, that doesn't mean that they're gonna call balls and strikes the way we would see it, or the way we see it today. In my thought process, so that's kind of, I know I went into the unclear, but I am somewhat unclear about where conservation easements would be most applicable. What is that universe that we would be looking at? And then the universe of other tools, I would love for staff to say, okay, hey, it really wouldn't be applicable in this universe because of X, Y, and Z. But if that is the big bucket that can give us the most amount of protection with the least amount of flexibility to do damage and to damage people and their quality of life, particularly for the future, then I want to lean in that direction. Does that give you a little bit of direction there, Erin?
Sort of.
Thank you.
I
Is there-
think so. I mean, I hear your individual perspective and
Your
individual, and what I would say is, when I said my approach may, if you asked me, Leslie, bring something and how you would approach it, it may not align to how you say, and this is the reason I'm saying, why I asked about it is because I'll just hitch to what you just said. I believe we should leverage the multiple tools. I don't think it should be a one size and we just say, oh, we're trying to put conservations and easements. I believe that it may not show up in policy. I have to kind of contemplate on that a little bit more to see how do you make it work from a legal perspective and policy? But on the staff side, the way I see it play out is, one, there are things that we have to be intentional about, like, are we going to disrupt greenways? So, but when we get greenway stuff, it's so many individual parcels. To me, that may not be worth all of the transactions that go with it, unless we're being intentional to just add on each time we do it. It's not a conservation, it may be something else. It may be I'm gonna call it a deed restriction that says this can only be and remain a trail in a greenway. So it's not going through all of that other legal whatever. But then you may buy a parcel and on that parcel, it's 20 acres. And you buy it today, it's 20 acres. And it has the parcel that you're buying has this intense tree density, or it has a huge tree canopy that you don't want to disrupt intentionally, right? So we may say, because of it, whatever that density is, it may be when I guess what I'm trying to say, it may be that we need to work through types of scenarios or priorities of things that we need to, and how we need to act on it when the parcel shows up that way. And like, if it is ecologically has things that we are knowing that needs to be preserved, it may be, yep, that's when you do the whole conservation easement and you preserve that nature preserve as it needs to be. It may be a park open space that we're buying and we know it's going to be a park, but yet the capital planning team hasn't even done a layout yet to figure out how they're just buying it to buy it. And it may be other parcels that we're trying to adjoin to it. So they just don't know what it's going to look like. So what's the flexibility or some generic languages that we should say about how it is, but it may not be that we have to get a conservation easement on that property. It may or may not. So I think those are to the point of where you're saying, do you tier them some kind of way? Do we set them up that kind of way? If that's the synergy, we can come up with things that y'all can react to say, nope, need you to be more stringent. Nope, this works or not. But we need to hear from you. It's not a one size fits all. It is prioritization. It is leveraging multiple tools and the like, but.
Well, that iteration, I'm good with. Me.
We have to definitely refine it. I mean, way more than how it is and figure out what that looks like. But if we didn't want to bring something prematurely, because I want to respond to what your interests are.
Well, I think all of us want to do the most we can to preserve our intentions and preserve the work that we've achieved. We don't want a future board coming along and getting rid of all this green space that we have worked so hard to acquire, so.
Right. And the messed up thing in this truth is that I can't think of what's that right thing, but there could be something in the future that it's that right thing, that you do need the flexibility to do something else with that site. I don't know what it is, but how do we allow for it, or is we never allow for it? And if you have an interest to put something else, be some other social service amenity, it requires you have to get another parcel to make that happen. You know, and I don't know, you know, then. But we're definitely not, I want to make sure that as you're collectively are speaking, that we are not land banking. From a staff perspective, nor the board's perspective. Right now, we're acquiring land for the purposes of trying to ensure that our community has more open space and trying to keep up keep up with the development and growth, because it's rapidly changing, because developers are grabbing it and putting built structures on all of this space that has been previously treescaped, open space and and we're trying to be intentional of what we're buying for the purposes of trying to ensure that the community at large has parks, open spaces, whatever those things are that are for the protection of the environment.
Right, and so, and I got you. So we don't just buy parkland to buy it. We buy parkland with intentionality of whether it's, again, to protect something or to meet the needs of a community that is underserved.
Correct.
So it's a priority area.
Correct.
But while we are like acquiring the land in an area that's a park desert, we're also, and it's the only other department I think that's involved in that is stormwater. We're also, just by virtue of being in Parks and Rec, protecting the natural resources that are there. And quite often doing like some
Bless you.
enhancement and restoration and, you know, tree canopy and all pollinating plants and all the things that are missing from some of these parks. So I just want to make sure that anyone listening didn't think we just buy land to buy it. Like there's intentionality, but we do, when we purchase the land, say for park purposes, it
Yeah.
doesn't say park and school, park and
all
social
park
services,
purposes.
park and whatever. It is parkland. And if we get lost in that, we won't have any parkland left.
Right, no, you're spot on. We
So
do,
if-
we only purchase it for park purposes, and now where it may play out a little differently in the open space, nature preserve space kind of thing. We have shopped over the years, land for the purpose, which is park purpose, for regional rec centers, right? Or for a rec center, or for a splash park or mini. So we are acquiring sometimes for park purposes, that is not necessarily meaning it's 100% open space.
I understand that. And if you look, the recreation centers only take up
Right, a
56
small,
acres.
exactly. Mhm.
So
Now, the good is, and maybe it's a way that we can make this, bring something. I think most of the time, when we acquire the property, we kind of have behind the envelope how we think we're going to intend to use it. We know it's going to be a greenway. We know it's going to be passive. We know it's going to be active. We know it may be what we're trying to acquire to bridge a gap for a rec center. So based on the planned park use, there may be tools that we need to, how we leverage those tools for what we know it's going to be. So if we know it's going to be a rec center, I'm using that illustratively, we know definitively that we have to do that 50-50, that we can't use the whole site for concrete. We have to use the site and keep at least some form of tree density on there. Whereas if we're getting something that's clearly a nature preserve, maybe the tool then is we definitely go for a conservation use. I'm just using that illustratively. I'm not saying those are the answers.
and I think that every person that's listening to thinking of the future understands leveraging multiple tools. But what I believe the majority of the board will want is to make sure there are tools. There has to be additional protection on the land that we're purchasing. Because there's so many people already masterminding what they think they're gonna do with it. And so if we, you can't predict everything, but if you're buying a parcel where the population has a need for, we're buying a park parcel and then there's a need for whatever, a school, it can't be an afterthought. It has to be like, the purchase has to happen then, because schools are gonna come take schools, fire departments, utilities, they're all gonna want the park space. And so it can't be an option to say, oh, well, there's park space there, I'm gonna get it, because they believe it. You meet these people.
You're right. I mean, fortunately, you got today you have Jacqueline, right? And Jacqueline, but to that point, so that's a very good call out. So we do get developers, jurisdictional partners, and ask us, can they buy our land, have our land, and which we acquired for our own purpose, right? And there's one that I have a frustration point with one of our partners that I will not speak in public. But in anyway, there is, because I've seen it play out. And so we acquire something. Now, in that act is our policy or something, should the language be about how we choose to sell it or offload it or something like that? Should the language be on that side of the fence? Because we've talked about on this side, but you can only sell the property if it has boom, 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 where you have broad criteria that you have to take in consideration. Because there, in some instances where we do swaps and it does work to our benefit, right? But if we had one that says, nope, we have to stand still, do you just want to stand still, or do you want to even be open to those instances when you can swap and get something greater than or equal to?
How many instances? I mean, it has to be extremely rare to get a swap that's better than what you have.
We definitely get, trying to think,
That's generally our
approach.
Yeah.
We try to get
We try to make sure that the county comes out
on top.
and that even before it gets to you as a board, from a staff perspective, from the leadership at Park and Rec, and then from AFM, and oftentimes in conversation with the manager's office. So that portion of the process you never see. So we are vetting those to make sure that generally speaking, in the end, the county comes out on top on a land swap. And they don't occur frequently, a couple of times a year, but that's been generally what I have seen from here. The county comes out with more in the end of that process.
And in that instance, if it's parkland, is park staff involved every step of the way?
Absolutely. They did it. I don't move on an exchange until they are happy. Thank you. Absolutely. They are involved in that process, and we don't move forward with an exchange until they are satisfied. We often have different conditions that are associated with it, not from just the land perspective as far as acreage. There may be compensation included. There may be amenities that we want to get for parks. There may be conditions associated with it. In an exchange, when it comes to you often twice, but in the background, it is not unusual for an exchange to take upwards of a year to negotiate. In the capital planning section, and depending on what section of Park and Rec is involved in that, all the way from the leadership level, most of them involve park leadership as far as the details of that acquisition, and they often may involve the manager's office as well.
It's really important to me that natural resources is engaged. Always, You know, sometimes leadership,
When that happens.
yeah.
Yeah, there's always somebody from nature, from natural resources as part of our conversations for every single transaction that we have. It's part of our
And
internal
it's
group.
good from the beginning.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. They're sitting at the table from the very beginning.
Because there's so many things that have come before me in my life where they're shocking. You know, like what they want to build on Rural Hill. And you think, Rural Hill, it's a nature preserve. And so when it came to us, before I was elected, it came to the Stewardship Advisory Council on Parks and Rec. And there was an awesome, an awesome council member who they give us this presentation of what they want to do in a nature preserve, and you're thinking, are you kidding me? Like, we even have a grasshopper sparrow there that we're trying to protect, and they want to put all this building on there. And the council member says, this is not an amusement park. I'm like, it's a nature preserve. And so you can't blame people for trying, but it's shocking that it made it that far. And so luckily it didn't happen. And then we only built, or I shouldn't say the people that requested it only built a barn, which fits in. But these are the kind of things, like, if you don't think in advance and you don't have the right people showing up to advocate in mass, the high paid executives are well paid for strategy and smoke and mirrors on how it's all okay. And we just have to have a strong plan to protect it. And I'm okay with leveraging multiple tools. Like, I think we all are, because you can't have a conservation easement on everything. But there are some things that there's so much pressure on them. And I mean, you just go to West Branch Nature Preserve any day, and there's so much pressure on it that I'm scared we're gonna lose our salamanders. Like, I mean, even kids think it's funny to flip the logs over, and I think they're ruining habitat. And like, you want the public to have access, and then they're riding their bikes through there, and they're not supposed to ride their bikes. And so it's a nature preserve that has attracted development all around it. And you have to say, wait a minute, like, respect this nature preserve. And the town of Davidson asked for a conservation easement on it, and I still can't understand what the holdup is. And so there are parcels that need conservation easements like that one. And then there are some where you go there and you totally understand that it needs a layer of protection, but it doesn't need a conservation easement. And that's why natural resources is so important. But if anyone knows Doug Talamy from the University of Delaware, it used to be you could do you know him, Sean? I don't know. Well, it used to be you could rely on the green space in your community to take care of the biodiversity. We are so overbuilt that we have to rely on parkland. And so it will be the job of Parks and Rec to have the balance of tree canopy and everything else, because tree canopy, stormwater management, biodiversity, all these things are on the shoulders of Park and Rec right now. And it's like that picture I sent you guys this morning. If we're not thinking, that's what it's gonna be. And it's kind of an extreme picture, but it's real. So how do we direct staff to have tiers of stringency on every parcel that we acquire? And even the parcels that we have, how do we, you can think about that. You can marinate on that while Commissioner Rodriguez McDowell asks her question.
Well, my question was really, I think you pretty much asked it. I mean, I was trying to get to the purchasing, like to the point of purchase. And, when we purchase a piece of land, it is for an intention. It's not just, oh, this is open, let's just acquire it and call it parkland. It's like you have a real purpose behind it. And sometimes it is for nature preserve, or sometimes it is for a park. And that has different layers of protection that is needed, or a different tool is needed. And so my question was just, having insight into the purchasing process is helpful if you know that, we're not just looking for any piece of land that someone is willing to sell. That we're being intentional and targeted in where we're purchasing. So, I guess my thought was at the time of purchase, can we, at that time, figure out what layer of protection is needed for that purchase and have it as part of our process to apply it at that time so that going forward, our future land purchases are sort of categorized or protected, with different categories. And then what we need to do is go backwards and look at what we've already purchased and see what falls into what category. So, but I feel like you were just speaking to that.
Thank you. Commissioner Jarrell?
Perfect setup and segue. Thank you. That's it. My earlier comments were really taking more of, I know the conversation's been focused on future purchases. My comments have really been focused on a retrospective look around what we have that's not currently protected. So I want to make sure that I'm being clear with respect to, because we have this universe that's already in play, what's not protected right now, where do we have any idea of what the low-hanging fruit would be with respect to what would need a conservation easement like now with what we have that's currently unprotected? So, that's really where I'm trying to drive towards, to see, okay, then when we take a look at that universe, how do we implement that layered approach? And then obviously, I love the idea about the future parcels, sort of taking them on a case by case and evaluating them so that we understand what's the proper tool to use depending on whatever recommendations we get from staff.
On both. All of it. Like,
What?
there's the past and the future.
Yeah.
Let's protect all of it.
Right. Well, no, absolutely. I mean, we're definitely in lockstep there, protecting everything. But I think if I'm, again, to go back to the term prioritization, I have a real sense of urgency around what we have now that's not protected, that needs to be protected, like now. And so to go back and really understand that, so it's sort of like this two-track or simultaneous approach to it. So I just wanted to make sure I was being clear.
Thank you.
I'm clear. I think I concur that it's both forward and backwards, or forward and current, right? And I think there is an opportunity to identify, now this is Leslie's opinion. It doesn't mean it's going to be my collective team's input opinion. So I'm giving my disclaimer. I don't believe 22,000 acres needs conservation easements of what we have today. There may be other areas that I may Leslie's just viewpoint out of other people's viewpoint that will be shared, will be where of a priority, which is I think even what Commissioner Altman says, based on what we have today, we believe these are priority at risk. And if we don't do something over and beyond what we have today, we are at risk. And we may be able to create what that short list prioritization, whatever that looks like, right? Then I think it is, I'm not saying it's a playbook, I'm not saying it's the framework, but there is the opportunity as we move forward to create playbook, framework that helps us understand. And when we get this type of parcel for this purpose, this is the tool, this is how we'll proceed. When we get this is what we're going to do, what we will recommend. Now, on that ladder moving forward, it may not show up as policy, just like the 50-50 tool that we currently have in the 90-10. It's not a policy. Well, part of it's a policy, part of it isn't. So then we have to determine if we get consensus about the forward framework playbook, how, if anything, we can put in policy that aligns to that. And I'm not saying that it can't be, but that's the part that I think that we'd have to figure out, because you don't want to, not knowing what that is, it may be so itemized that you don't, your policy tends to be more broad, but we've got to figure out what that could look like if we refine the existing policy and add a statement or two that aligns to whatever that playbook thing would be. So what I would say that we could do as next steps, it may not show up at the next meeting, but maybe the subsequent after that, we may be able to say, okay, based on current, this is what we think. Based on future, this is the roadmap, decision-making framework, blueprint, whatever we want to call it, how we would suggest us moving forward and get reactions from the collective you to see if that seemingly passes y'all's pulse before elevating any further.
And I would say that I'm pretty sure that the board, the majority of the board want a policy that has a full-blown process to ensure that development pressure doesn't unravel the work that we've done. So there.
I definitely think there should be a
with a
policy.
process.
I think there could, yes. But I will get, what I'm gonna use as my deferred piece. Typically, we do not itemize process and policy, because process, but I think there's a way to get to what you're trying to achieve in some type of policy. So I think we can get there. It just may not be let us do the step A and B, which is identify what would be prioritization for the past, try to determine what we would say is the playbook for moving forward. Once we get consensus there, then try to determine how we craft policy to achieve those things. So I think I hear the interest for policy. I'm not going to speak to what it looks like yet, because we need to get to this other place first. And if there's a whole lot of in the weeds in the playbook, then it may not be able to show up in the policy. If they're broad and we can, then maybe we can. So
We're gonna get a policy.
no, I'm not saying that you won't get a policy.
We're getting one. So can you read what's in the chat?
Let's see. Dr. Shoemaker said land generally and preserves specifically are non-fungible entities, i.e. cannot be replaced or exchanged in such cases. A Pareto optimum
Oh, it's Latin, I think.
should be a guiding principle. Pareto efficiency or Pareto optimality, the situation where no action or allocation is available that makes one individual better off without making another worse off. And at Harris, said conservation easements can be amended if needed, and the amendment is consistent with the major objectives of the easement.
Dr. Shoemaker, can you translate that to English, please? Commissioner Altman?
Thank you. I was just gonna say that, you know, dollars to donuts at our next closed session, you might be bringing forward something for us to approve. And so, you know, it may be pretty obvious what would be most amenable, consistent with this conversation. You just go ahead and propose it for our consideration. If it's complicated or it's not clear, maybe it's a good teaching moment at our next closed session for us to understand what you're struggling with. I guess what I'm saying is that we're going to be confronted with this opportunity, I bet, in the next two weeks or 6 weeks, you know, because it happens constantly. And I would say, don't be shy to go ahead and, you know, if there's a clear answer or recommendation, in your opinion, that would help us move the needle in this direction, go ahead and come forward with it for the board to hear. Thank you.
Commissioner Rodriguez McDowell?
Thank you. So to, you know, further to kind of what you were saying is, let's say, you know, we have the opportunity to buy land for Greenway to connect. So are you saying that at this time, when we make that purchase, there's no protection on it that says this is going to be a Greenway connector? Or is there? Like, I'm trying to understand what we currently have in place. So like if Jacqueline's bringing us, you know, these linear purchases that she often does, are they not now protected? because they're gonna take years before we get to them?
Well, they're not protected in the sense of, do they have a deed restriction on them? But they are protected in the sense of, we've identified what the use is for those properties. Anything that is proposed to be disposed of requires a vote by the board. So it's highly unlikely, while it may not have that legal protection, it's highly unlikely that you would see a greenway property disposed of or not used as intended, because in most cases, you also have a capital package that's associated with it. So you've already, in many cases, allocated dollars for it. So we know that there's gonna be construction on that property, and you have other, not associated with the ownership or associated with the ownership of the property. You have other regulations that you often see on floodplain property that makes it a little difficult for you to see something happen that's not intended.
The other thing I would say, is that your highest risk for someone doing something alternative to that site? Probably not. That's not your highest risk parcel. So I would not, it's almost like you have to also have, it's not here, your risk assessment and understand which are the ones that are highest risk to be changed, to be used for other purposes. And those are the ones that I think that we have to be a little bit more intentional about based on y'all's reactions and commentary of what we do more on those things that potentially may be at risk. And it's not, and it may not be everything. Which is that prioritization piece.
Okay.
Pardon? Sure. Sean, did you have a question? Comment? We thought you were raising your hand.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman Powell. So coming from Catawba Lands Conservancy, I think it's important to be clear. We agree that there are the right tools for the right properties, and conservation easements, while a wonderful tool that we fully support, is not appropriate for every single property. When we are evaluating conservation projects, we're looking to make sure that we're putting conservation easements on properties where there's actual conservation values worth protecting. That is not going to be the case for a splash pad or a water park. There's nothing there for us to protect. I'll say, as the new land stewardship director for Catawba Lands Conservancy, we look at all of our easement holders as partners. And so while the easements may specify what can and cannot be done, there's usually flexibility built into those easements. We're sure to work with our landowners ahead of time to think about what might be needed in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, and write that flexibility into an easement. And then 10 to 15 years later, when we have a new landowner or a change in commissioners, if there's a new use that's maybe conceived or looked at, sometimes it's very clear in the easement, yes, no, but other times there might be flexibility that allows for it. I think a perfect example is trails. We often have language in our easements, almost always, that allows for passive recreation. And it'll say natural surface trail and a paved trail only if to protect and prevent erosion. So you might have a trail that today is sufficient to support natural surface, but in the future, West Branch Nature Preserve, it may be that because of the intensive use, erosion becomes an issue and a paved trail or maybe an impervious surface trail is appropriate. So there's abilities to design flexibility in these easements. This would not be the first time we've worked with the county government to do an easement on large parks. We hold a conservation easement on Mountain Creek Park up in Catawba County, which is 500 acres. We're working with Gaston County on a future park there as well. So it would not be a new thing for a county to work with us as a partner on conservation easements on parklands and nature preserves. So thank you very much for the recognition.
Thank you. Any questions?
Minor question.
Sure, Commissioner Rodriguez McDowell.
Thank you. Does it add to the price of the parcel to put an easement? Like, does it cost money to do this? If so, is it significant? So like, let's say next time, you come to us with a purchase, is it proportionate to how much the land costs, or is it just like an admin fee? Like, what is it to do easement?
Susan Hall, we've been dying to hear from you.
Yeah, as far as, I mean, we would work with someone, I guess, like Catawba Lands Conservancy to put a conservation easement on it if that's what you wanted. So I don't know. I mean, you might be able to address more as far as, those type fees or what might be involved in that. I mean, with the county, we would do the in-house legal review and have that on it. I mean, one aspect of all this with the conservation easements, and this is probably, more in Jacqueline's ballpark, is, we buy the property for, I don't know, $1 million. And then if we put a conservation easement on it, it actually lowers the value of our property by some certain amount. So, I mean, right off the bat, we take a huge hit because our land is no longer worth as much as it was just from an economic standpoint. I mean, I understand there's other considerations, but just from an economic standpoint, we lose a lot of market value by putting the conservation easement on it. So, I mean, in that sense, they're not free. I mean, they do cost significantly just as far as that goes.
Could you explain that more? Because I don't understand the cost. I mean, I understand the value would go down, but because other people, but that's what we want.
Yeah.
We don't.
We don't-
Oh, that's
don't
what I'm
wanna
saying. I mean,
alienate it.
there's other considerations with that. I mean, I understand,
Okay.
you've got other, but I'm just saying from a strictly market standpoint, I mean,
Okay.
that, if you're having to answer to someone, I mean, that's, that's a factor. I mean, but I understand in what I said, there are other factors here. I mean, obviously you're trying to achieve other objectives that you can't hardly put a price tag on. So that,
Because if we could, it would be more valuable.
right.
Yeah.
And to some people it would be, but I'm just saying that is a consideration, whenever we're looking at costs on these.
Well, call us, because you hate for money to dictate the future of protecting natural resources, like you don't want that. If the value of the land goes down because you put a conservation easement on it to keep you from doing it. It's,
That one has.
you don't want it to happen, you don't want to not buy a parcel because it's conserved. It's just like, what can we do to ensure that the future is protected?
Right.
When so, like you can Google it. There's so many communities that didn't think ahead,
Right.
especially urban areas.
But in the future, I guess you would also be looking if, like we've discussed, they can be changed, but you have to hire a consultant to do a conservation benefit analysis if you want to make a change. And that can cost, I don't know what the cost of those are, but they can be expensive because we're having to hire, outside parties to do a conservation benefit analysis. And then after they do the analysis, then it would go to Catawba Lands Conservancy or whoever, then they would make the decision whether what we want to do would be allowed. And in some cases, I think like Dr. Johnson alluded to, sometimes, I mean, that isn't guaranteed always. I know one particular instance we had some property and the state of North Carolina held a conservation easement on it. And I was on the phone call with the people from the state, and they had stated that because so many other people along that particular stretch of creek, not us, I mean, I'm not, it wasn't any actions that we had taken or not taken, but other people along the creek had requested so many variations from the conservation easement that the last one they granted, they said they weren't going to grant any more along that particular stretch of creek. And again, that was something that was totally out of our control that we had nothing to do with, but if we wanted to change it, we were going to pay the cost of it because the state said no more. So again, I just throw this out there. I mean, it's everything is a balance, and we've got our objectives and what we want to do. But I think we have to look at the other sides of it too. So.
I think that's why we're here, because it's so out of balance that we have to protect it and be serious about it. And like Commissioner Jarrell said, there's an urgency. And so, I guess you want to read this. The translation? Is it the translation?
No, it's
Uh,
from Reverend Garner Mullen. She's a member of
oh.
the Air Quality Commission. This is a nice note to end on, maybe we need to be like the Sankofi bird, to reach back to what has worked relative to protection for future land purchases. I think it's, I mean, Sankofa bird from Ghana.
I have to look up the bird. Thank you, thank you. And I don't, I mean, we only have 2 more minutes. I don't think I know you have 2 more scenarios because I have thought through, I've like lived through them. Sure. Commissioner Rodriguez McDowell.
So, Madam Chair, I would like to make a motion that we move forward to make it a board policy, either by adding another whereas or whatever on our current policy, or creating a separate policy, whichever is appropriate, that we add layers of protection to preserve all land purchased with our ELAP funds. So we're not saying what level of protection, but we're saying a level of protection whenever we're using our ELAP funds. So using the land protection tools that we've already identified.
To address Commissioner Jarrell's concerns, do you want to add all parkland? Layers of protection for all parkland?
Definitely.
Okay, so say it again.
Okay, so I want to make a motion to move forward to make it a board policy or add to our current policy another stanza to add layers of protection to preserve all land purchased with ELAP funds or I was looking at the list that of the things we already have. And so if we added parkland to that, it would seem appropriate. So I don't know how to word it though. Because those may not have been purchased with ELAP funds.
So Commissioner Jarrell.
So when you make that motion, should the motion be a recommendation to the full board to make it a policy or?
Yeah, because we would need 5 votes.
Right, but that's what I'm saying, the way the motion read, I just want to make sure it's right in the record.
Mhm.
Because I didn't hear the recommendation to the full board.
Yeah, because I guess in some cases, we wouldn't be using ELAP funds if we were buying parkland. We could be using other funds, right? So we want to make sure we're not just limiting ourselves to ELAP.
May I be heard? Or purchases.
Change your motion.
She made a motion.
If you amended her motion, I mean, your motion is to align to that.
Yeah, I'm literally asking about the language on the motion. Should the language be more a recommendation to the full board or can the motion read as followed, the way she just said it?
I know what you said.
So you're fine with the way that, okay, 'cause I didn't want to get hung up on the technicality.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And you're okay with her?
Yeah,
including-
absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah,
I want to make sure she included.
Yeah, thank you.
And Commissioner Altman.
I mean, I think we all want to do what we can to preserve what the work we've done. And so I think the only question is how best to go about doing that. Because I think we're completely aligned on the end game. And, I would have waited and not made a motion because I believe staff is really clear that we want them to come back with a lot of what we discussed. And I'd like to see what it looks like before we settle on language that we're asking the full board to adopt, because I don't know for sure yet. Like, if you went back and said exactly what you said, like, there might be pieces of it that, like, if it's small pieces that aren't gonna do anything and there's a lot of labor involved, or whatever, like, if it's just little tiny pieces, like, do we actually mean all? So that they've got to do it every time they're out of compliance? Or is it high value things? Or is it high risk things? Like, I just think for me, we're not quite ready to like codify a policy because I still don't know I just need a little more experience with how this plays out. And I would probably wait, and hopefully staff would be able to be responsive to our request today and bring this back. And, I don't know if you can come back in 4 weeks or 8 weeks, so I would ask to maybe table the motion just that long to give them a chance to come back with developing this a little more before we take it to the full board, just because I don't want it to get shot down there. I want it to be a little more baked, but that's just my suggestion.
I love your motion.
You do?
Yeah, but
Well,
I do understand, like, and I will say though, there's no parcel that's not important. They all need to be protected, and it's the way we protect them that I think. So I guess the motion that would be unanimous today is we want to see the tools that you're, I have it written down, the multiple tools available for every parcel, because every parcel needs a layer of protection. And so, I guess we don't need to make another motion on that. Are you comfortable?
yeah,
Okay.
guys, I want to make sure that we're moving toward a policy, not just, meeting again and, but we're moving toward building this policy.
So
So that was my concern.
So
Yeah, yeah.
you're essentially giving them direction to
Mhm.
come back to us, to your point, Commissioner Altman.
So this is what I see as potential next steps. I don't know if we'll be able to do it by the next meeting, but I think no later than the following after that, but I'll have to convey with the team. There's two paths that have already been referenced that we'll do. We'll try to have an understanding of, in our current portfolio, what will we recommend as priorities? What would be our process moving forward? I'm recognizing that a lot of that process moving forward may be more what I'm gonna call internal processes, just like we have identifying the tools and how we currently do stuff. And how we recommend moving forward to do stuff. Then with that, if we already have an idea of what that draft policy is, at that same time, we may bring that. And or we'll eventually bring the policy, of which I probably would recommend that we, as you recommended, create another statement within the existing environmental leadership policy and build upon that versus it being fragmented. The last thing that I would note is, to Commissioner Altman's point, I think you would be better positioned having those other two pathways kind of vetted before going to the full board, because if they see something, I'm gonna say generically, layers of protection, they're gonna be, what is that? How is that? Help me understand that. And if we don't have that kind of resolved with the collective view, then it may run into its own bump, and I don't want that to happen for you.
Okay, great.
So we're all good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
So I'm just going to say a couple things in closing. And you've heard me say it before, but I think it's really important, more mindfulness of, all of the meetings that I went to for years to listen to regional input for Connect Our Future. And 4 of the top 10 priorities regionally were, number 1 was water quality. And number 1, like everywhere we went, was water quality. And then in the top 4, we had air quality, green space, parks, access to nature, and then protection of farmland. Because once they saw through all the exercises, the threats, it was interesting to watch people change their minds about what was their priority, because economics has always been so powerful. And, when you think about that, air quality, water quality, green space, parks, farmland, these are all things that we need to have for a resilient future. And so every parcel that we're talking about is important. And I'm really, when Dr. Shoemaker asked worst case scenario, I had it. Like, I realized, like, I felt like we have so much good energy on this board. We're doing such great work. We're acquiring this land. I love it when Jacqueline comes to closed session. Like, we're doing it. And then I started to see all the threats of, I thought our policy protected us, but it doesn't. And so I love the dialogue today, because the bottom line is the health and wellness of the people that live here. And it's all connected, and it matters, and it cannot be an afterthought, and we can't be selling parkland. Everyone will find a reason to have parkland, and they'll make it sound good, but it's parkland, it's nature preserves, and we have to have balance. And so for the health and wellness, for the best estate planning that we can do, Commissioner Altman, I think that we're on the right track. So do I hear is there anything else to read? Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Altman, seconded by Commissioner Rodriguez McDowell. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Meeting's adjourned. Thank you.
Anything, the gavel.
Oh. Green gavel.
I am just saying.
Thank you.